Great. Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 116th meeting that we've had consecutively. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Speed and Dennis Small, the co-moderators. And I like to remind everyone why we created this forum 116 weeks ago when we started off these meetings, because, sometimes it's uncomfortable talking with people you don't agree with. We wanted to unite the international peace movement of whatever philosophy you're from, whatever language you speak, and whatever nationality you come from in order to accomplish this goal. And there are many enemies of peace who would like to prevent that from happening. So please keep that in mind as we're discussing today, which it's very important that we're able to do this. So I'd like to thank all the veterans of this process who have joined us over the last 116 weeks, and also the new people who have joined us today. If you are a new person, please feel free during the general discussion period to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and if you're with any organizations and any ideas or initiatives that you have. And if you're watching this over YouTube or Zoom, wherever you're watching this being broadcast, please feel free to take a minute to share this with your organizations, your friends, your family, reasonable enemies to hop on and be part of the discussion today, because this is very important. To start us off for the discussion today is Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Hello to all of you. From the many crisis spots, I have to start naturally with the situation in Gaza, where the genocide is going on fully without any interference. And, this is why we are in the process of preparing an international campaign to put the Resolution 377 of the United Nations up front, which is Uniting for Peace. This was first crafted in 1950 and has been applied 30 times since. And what it basically means is that if the UN Security Council is blocked because of the veto of one or more of the permanent powers, then you can vote to move the decision-making to the UN General Assembly. And we are gearing up with the Schiller Institute and the IPC to support that transition occurs just when the UN General Assembly of this year starts. The situation on the ground is abysmal, and one really lacks the words to describe what is going on. Officially now, 500,000 people are in official famine, in a catastrophic condition. It's expected that there's 640,000 by the end of September, minus those who will have died naturally. So it's an official famine. Now, there is an IDF offensive against Gaza City started already. Supposedly, they have already taken over certain suburbs, and naturally, the countries around in the area are also gearing up. Egypt has reportedly mobilized 40,000 troops in the Sinai, obviously to prevent that these people being chased there, which was one of the aims which had been mentioned in the past. So please pick up on our initiative on this 377, because, obviously the UN General Assembly could decide, well, they could decide to send a large contingent of blue helmets. Now, I have been thinking hard, is that remedying the situation? And I was told by a very influential and knowledgeable person from the UN or past UN functions, that just the presence of very many international forces united in the blue helmet deployment around Gaza would send a message to the world. Now, I don't know we have to discuss this, if this is really the only thing we can do, but that's the present state of the discussion. And please stay tuned on our website, because we will give out more concrete marching orders to this effect. Now, the Ukraine crisis naturally also reaches a point of soon ending, simply because the fact that the Ukrainian people are vanishing. There are now more or less confirmed official reports that the total number of casualties in Ukraine was 1.7 million, and either killed or missing. And a Ukrainian member of parliament with the name of Dmytruk said, that Ukraine lost several generations of its young people, and that is for sure now reaching the older ones as well. Now, the present debate is unconclusive, but it would not have to be. It is reported in Politico that the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Elbridge Colby addressed a few days ago a private meeting which was called in on a video basis by U.S. Chairman of Joint Chief of Staff General Dan Kane, who had put together a number of European defense chiefs, and he told them, Elbridge Colby told them that the Europeans had to more or less rely on their own, that there was absolutely nothing firm to be expected from the United States in terms of securing the peace after Russia would pull back its invasion. Now, Trump added 10% to the cost of arms, which Europe is supposed to buy from the United States to then deliver to Ukraine, which is not exactly a wise move at all. And, obviously there is now a big debate, should European troops be sent, German troops? The British already said no, they don't want to send troops because they know perfectly well that that's the red line for the Russians. But in Germany, the Young Union, that's the youth organization of the CDU, CSU, they are fully for it. But there are even members from the CDU who are opposing it. One of them is Michael Kretschmer, Minister President of Saxony, who strongly warns against such a deployment. Also in the Social Democrats, Ralf Stegner and Ralf Mützenich have now come out strongly against it, in light of the history of Germany and the Russia in the Second World War. Now, that debate is not yet finished, but one can say it would actually be very easy to resolve, because a solution was already worked out completely at the Istanbul meeting in March 22, where there was an agreement between Zelensky and Putin to agree on the so-called Istanbul formula. And that would simply involve Ukraine to go into permanent neutrality, no foreign troops on Ukrainian soil, and the security guarantee would be given by the permanent five of the UN Security Council, plus other nations such as Ukraine, such as Turkey, and possibly others. Now, that makes total sense. This is the so-called Austria formula. The time when Austria was a neutral country worked very well. It did not cause any harm to anybody. And interestingly enough, when Jaishankar, the foreign minister, sort of foreign relations minister of India, just visited Moscow, where he met with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, basically Lavrov in his press briefing repeated that particular proposal, namely to have permanent neutrality of Ukraine, the permanent five security guarantee, And he also mentioned that 1.7 million dead people before, that's now my formulation, that solution was already agreed upon. But then the war party deployed crazy Boris Johnson to Kiev, and Boris Johnson told Zelensky to absolutely keep the fighting going because all of NATO would back him up. So now that is right now, in my view, the most realistic proposal on the table. It was also mentioned on a webpage called Lawfare by Ukrainian lawyer Mikhailov Soldatenkov, who basically repeated, that this solution is actually on the table. This is actually an old idea. It was mentioned already in the memoirs of the French diplomat Maurice Courdeau-Montagne, who used to be an advisor to President Chirac, and who also was an ambassador to Russia and China. And he was already sent by Chirac in 2006 to Moscow to propose this approach to Ukraine. And at that time, the Russians were extremely appreciative of that proposal. So I think that is actually something we should really campaign for, because if the permanent five are in it, it includes Russia, it would also emphatically include China, and therefore, it really would solve the problem. Now, obviously, the relationship among the BRICS is very favorable for such a relation. I should mention, just for for mentioning sake, that the rapprochement, or getting closer among the BRICS countries in reaction to President Trump's wild sanctioning tariff, tariff installment, 50%, 100%. I mean, nobody knows how far that can go from one day to the next. But what that resulted in is that all the BRICS countries have moved much closer together. Lula and China, Lula and Modi, but especially, Wang Yi was just now for a 3-day visit in India, meeting with Jaishankar, with the National Security Advisor, and even Modi, my Prime Minister Modi. And immediately after that, Jaishankar went to Moscow to meet with Lavrov, where they reiterated the deepening special privileged relations between India and Russia, basically, ignoring more or less what Trump had said. And, in India, there is a very strong sense of the non-aligned tradition. They do not like to be pushed around, and they felt that the statements by President Trump and the threat of tariffs was just too much. And what it has resulted in is rather a lessening of the relationship between the United States and India all the more moving closely to Russia, and very importantly, closer to China. Modi will go to the SCO, to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, end of August, beginning of September. And in all likelihood, he will meet with President Xi and may even participate in the Beijing military parade at the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in the Pacific, where China will demonstrate some of its latest breakthroughs in military technology. And also President Putin has already announced, and we are campaigning with an appeal to President Xi, Modi, and to President Xi Jinping, Putin, and Trump, that under all circumstances, President Trump should go there, and in that way send a very strong signal to the whole world that the new way is cooperation among the major powers to solve the problems. And that takes place at the same day. The Vladivostok conference starts, where one of the big topics is Arctic development. And so the very successful, in my view, very successful meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska, where implicitly the Arctic development was in the background of the discussion, it could move into a next phase. And, we are also campaigning to put the building of the corridor across the Bering Strait on the agenda, because that is, the solution to move the world in the direction of the world land bridge of all continents working together for the common good of all of humanity. It is unfortunately very telling that the European Union is still in a different universe, in a different age, maybe the Middle Ages or maybe the Ice Age or some other time, in any case, not fit for the 21st century, because they decided to opt out from participating in the military parade in Beijing because they do not want to, quote, offend Japan, offend Japanese militarism, one could rather say. So I think that this creates this. I can only sketch some elements of the picture. I think the Middle East Gaza situation requires urgent mobilization for the Uniting for Peace initiative, and the formula of a permanent neutrality of Ukraine in the context of a new security and development architecture, which we have been campaigning for several years now, because the principle of an indivisible security, is absolutely valid, because you cannot try to boost the security of one party at the total expense of the other one, because these imbalances are then what gives room for wars. So that's why, the demand we always include is the idea of a new security and development architecture, which absolutely must take care of the security interest and development interest of every single country on the planet. And that remains what we are committed to. That's what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Great, thank you, Helga. And I'm including actually in the chat right now, we did have a press release this morning of, I think it's 97 leaders from around the world. Yes, 97 leaders from around the world who have signed your letter calling for an urgent summit of Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping, Presidents Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping. So I think this is very important. People should check it out. Definitely sign it yourself and get it around to various other people as well, because this could happen very, very quickly. So thank you very much, Helga, for that. Next, we'll continue with our discussion, and it's always a pleasure to have on Dr. Ted Postal for the discussion. He's a leading nuclear, actually, I would call him the leading nuclear weapons expert and professor emeritus of science, technology, and international security at MIT. Thank you so much for joining us, Ted. It's a joy to have you on. Well, to scare the pants off everyone.
Thank you very much. I have to thank the Prussian General Helga LaRouche for driving me into coming on. So, but I thank her for the opportunity. Helga has done a wonderful job of summarizing the current situation. Everything she has said, I've been following this thing very closely. It's a very, very good summary, and I think that it was tremendously helpful. So I can't add much to that summary, but what I can do is tell you a little bit about how the situation with regard to nuclear proliferation in the Middle East has changed with regard to the attacks by Israel and the United States on Iran. And this is an important development. A simple way to summarize the situation is that there are now two undeclared nuclear weapon states in the Middle East. One of them, of course, is Israel, which is an undeclared nuclear weapon state, and the other is now Iran. And there is no doubt, I want to underscore this, no doubt people are interested. I have put out several briefings on this matter. I can provide them to people. If you have a website, you might also put them up there, but if you ask me directly. And this explains how Iran now has the capacity to deploy roughly 10 atomic bombs of basically Hiroshima to Nagasaki yield in its to have an arsenal that big. And in this briefing, I explain the technology capabilities because there are two critical facts. I want to underscore these are facts. These are not disputable. That lead to the conclusion that Iran could be a nuclear weapon state, could already be a nuclear weapon state, or could be a nuclear weapon state within maybe weeks of a decision by the leadership to go ahead and produce nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons that they would have would not need to be tested as nuclear devices. They could be tested as devices built out of uranium-238, which is the non-nuclear isotope of uranium, just to make sure that the mechanical mechanisms work. But if the mechanical mechanisms work, there is absolutely no doubt that the weapon would go nuclear. And this was, in fact, the situation when the United States attacked Hiroshima in August of 1945. We did not even test the little boy bomb that was used to destroy Hiroshima. It was tested with uranium-238 just to make sure the mechanics worked. And then we went ahead and used enriched uranium-235, which is the weapons material, substituted that for the uranium-238, and we just dropped the bomb, untested as a nuclear weapon, on Hiroshima. So you don't need to do a nuclear test. Now, the Iranians have devices called centrifuges. These centrifuges simply are very fast spinning cylinders. If people were interested, the centrifuges is described in a very schematic way in this briefing. But basically, it rotates at very high speeds, 60,000 or 70,000 revolutions per minute. This is an extraordinarily sophisticated mechanical device. If you had a flea on the outside corner, on the outside shield of this spinning centrifuge, it would produce a half kilogram of lateral force that would cause this thing to shake and break apart. It has to be tremendously precisely machined and constructed. So these are very, very sophisticated devices. The Iranians use a cascade, which is a collection of these devices. In this briefing, I have the actual configuration of the cascade shown because I worked that out from public data. And it consists of 174 of these centrifuges. Now, just to give you a sense of how many centrifuges the Iranians are working with before this attack, they had upwards of 13,000 centrifuges. So I'm talking about only 174. We don't know that those 13,000 are all the centrifuges they have because we have been unable to monitor the actual production line since around 2021. So there could be more. There's certainly 40 or 50,000 components for additional centrifuges that have not yet been assembled. So the point of these numbers, I'm sorry to use them because it couldn't be confusing, is that it would be very straightforward for Iran to place one of these 174 centrifuge cascades into a secret location to produce enriched uranium for an atomic bomb. Now, to give you some additional information, in this briefing, I show that the floor area of a cavern that would contain these 174 centrifuges would be no more than 60 square meters, 600 square feet. So, that's like a modest studio apartment. And the amount of energy you would need to make them work would be several tens of kilowatts. So if you had a Prius motor and generator, Prius car motor and generator, that produces 150 kilowatts. So you could, with a small motor and generator, you could produce the energy in this secret small location to run the centrifuge cascade. Now, if that centrifuge cascade were used to produce 60% enriched uranium-235, that cascade would take about 5.5 years to produce 60% enriched uranium-235. However, the Iranians already have 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium-235. All they would need to produce weapons grade uranium-235 is to run this centrifuge cascade for about a month, maybe 5 weeks or a month, to produce a nuclear weapon, assuming that's all they have. In other words, just this one small cascade out of 13,000, that they had operating before this attack. My point is simply that the mechanical and technical resources for producing an atomic bomb are in hand. It's impossible to believe that the Iranians don't already have enough centrifuges and cascades to produce atomic bombs in weeks from the 60%, the 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium-235. This means that if the Iranians have done nothing with this material, it was not destroyed, so they removed it successfully and moved it to secret locations. And if they decided today that they wanted an atomic bomb, they would probably have an atomic bomb by mid-September. So if they had not done anything, we don't know that if they have done something. So this was brought about, this situation was produced, was created by the U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities. Prior to that attack, the 408 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium was under observation by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So there was nothing that the Iranians could do with those materials as long as they were being under the observation and supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Once the attack occurred, the Iranians threw the International Atomic Energy Agency out and of course, moved these precious materials, at least precious for them, into secret locations. So we have no idea what they are doing with these materials. But we know that they have the materials, And we know that all they need to do with the materials can be done with resources they already have in hand. So I suspect, I can only guess, that the position of Iran will simply be, we are not saying whether or not we have nuclear weapons, because they have a problem with a reaction from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey if they declared themselves a nuclear weapon state. But uh, if you were uh, an Israeli leader, would you want to bet that you would not be there would not be a nuclear retaliation against you from Iran if you attacked Iran with nuclear weapons? So it's now a nuclear standoff, and that's potentially more dangerous, quite a more dangerous situation relative to what might have been, which was before this, we knew that Iran was not producing nuclear weapons. So this is a change in the global situation. It's not just the Middle East. And of course, there are other issues that go beyond this that other people, maybe Scott even could talk to this, but the global situation is even worse with regard to tempting states to go nuclear, because this is the kind of behavior of the nuclear weapon states, in this case, the United States and Israel, that tells political leaders who have the capacity to build nuclear weapons but are constrained by international observations that maybe they want to throw these international observers out and also be an undeclared nuclear weapon state. This has potentially quite serious implications. I'll stop here because I know I'm taking a fair amount of time, but I wanted to inject this because Helga really has said everything perfectly in a beautiful summary relative to what's now going on at the moment. But I think it's important to not recognize and acknowledge and explain the ongoing descent into a more and more dangerous situation we are now in. And I'll stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted, for going through that. I actually think it's useful to have this as part of the discussion. And we do have on Scott Ritter, who's a former UN weapons inspector, to respond. I wanted to see, Helga, if you had a quick response to Ted before we continued. Otherwise, we'll just keep going with the agenda.
I have only one very short question. I mean, so far, the situation was that the Iranians have always emphasized that the fatwa not to build nuclear weapons because it would be against the convictions of the Islamic faith was, valid. Do you think that that has been, invalidated because of the attack?
Well, I don't. First of all, it's important to understand that a fatwa is a statement that has authority because a very important Islamic leader makes it, a person with stature within the religious, within the religion. It does not have the strength of fundamental law. It could be changed or under extenuating circumstances modified or even eliminated. So my guess, again, I'm only guessing, is that the strategy that Iran will adopt is strategic uncertainty, because that serves them best, it seems to me. And so they may not say that the fatwa is no longer enforced, but there are conditions in Islamic law, I've actually done some research on this, which allow the fatwa to be put aside. And so my guess is the best thing to do is to simply not say anything about modifying the fatwa while recognizing the conditions may have changed and proceeding as you would as if the fatwa didn't exist. So I think that's an important detail that I'm glad you asked about.
Thank you, Ted Postal, for that response. And we'll continue, and then, of course, we'll come back for more dialogue. But I want to bring in Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence specialist. And you're just getting back from Russia. Thank you so much for joining us. And many of us have actually been following your trip. So we're very excited and all ears to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll just give a brief report. Basically, my trip was designed to further the cause of citizens diplomacy, to, begin a process or continue a process that had been stalled, thanks to the United States government, of capturing Russian reality and bringing it back to an American audience so that we can help overcome the disease of Russophobia. We have a president who had the courage to meet with his Russian counterpart in Alaska, regardless of what you think of President Trump. And I think people understand I don't hold him the highest regard. This was a politically risky move on his part, but the cause is just, and he recognizes the necessity for at least creating the potential of peace. The Russian people support this 100%. I can say without exception, everybody I spoke to was supportive of bettering relations between the United States and Russia. They also believe that Ukraine is a temporary obstacle that will be overcome one way or another. But that the big picture is how to get America and Russia on track so they can peacefully coexist in this world and we avoid the potential of nuclear war. I want to remind everybody, just to put this in the proper context, you've heard me warn about the threat of nuclear war for some time now. The CIA assessed last year there's a better than 50% chance there'll be a nuclear war by the end of the year. That's not me screaming the sky is falling. That's a Central Intelligence Agency acting upon their assessment of Russian nuclear doctrine, and assessing what the impact of proposed policy initiatives by the Biden administration would be on Russia. Better than 50% chance of a nuclear war last year. So here we are today with our two presidents talking. It doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean there's going to be an easy or ready solution. But automatically, I think we have taken nuclear conflict off the table for the time being. It doesn't mean that we let our guard down. It just means that we need to reinforce success. And that's the importance of citizens diplomacy. And I would just encourage everybody to support those who are carrying it out. And if you want to get on board, jump on board. It's not an exclusive club. It's open to everybody. So that's that. Unfortunately, I don't have all the time in the world, so I'll just leave it at that. If anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you very much, Scott, for joining us. I'm sure you're pretty wiped out from your exciting trip to Russia, and thank you for your diplomacy that you're doing right now. Helga or Ted, do you have a response to Scott? Or any questions before we continue?
Well, I've been chatting with Scott offline, and I just want to say that I think he's somewhat understated what he's achieved in his visit to Russia. And people like me who are familiar with Russian culture, I just want to say what he reports is tremendously uplifting, because I think what I have understood is that the Russian leadership is pretty much fed up with the West. And it's good to know that so many people in Russia feel that there's a way out. And I just want to make that a short comment, nothing more.
I appreciate it. I just want to add to that. I mean, you don't want to ever, get ahead of yourself, get ahead of your skis. But I was told by a senior Russian official on the way out that the week I had spent had set off what they call an information nuclear weapon inside Russia, in a good way, that all of Russia is abuzz. To have an American come over and engage in these kinds of conversations to try and understand the Russian reality and to take it back to the United States, created a very positive atmosphere that got the attention of the highest levels in Russia. I don't know what else I can say besides that. I hope everybody understands what I'm saying. And this is citizens diplomacy at its best, to create a positive environment that that impacts on the leadership. That's what citizens do. We're not the leaders in terms of executive authority, but we have the potential to influence our leaders. And I can say in Russia, this trip influenced the Russian leader. I'll be publishing a letter today that Ted signed, along with Dennis Kucinich and Ray McGovern and myself, to President Trump, indicating the success of this trip and how we believe we can help President Trump move forward with his policy objectives of peace. So we're not passive. We are citizen activists, and we're doing what we do. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses. The team that signed this letter are all experienced professionals, experts in their respective fields, who are contributing significantly to the cause of peace. And we believe that we could help President Trump achieve his objectives of peace with Russia. So that's the report.
Thank you. Go ahead, Helga.
I would like to ask you, Scott, since you have a fresh impression, the military situation in Ukraine seems to come to a point of ending, by mere attrition fairly soon. You have these coalition of the willing who are now talking about, keep sending weapons to Ukraine, helping Ukraine to build factories for long-range missiles to be built inside Ukraine. I don't want to repeat the whole long list. What is, in your view, the best pathway, also for the Schiller Institute, for the IPC? What can we tell people, how to deploy? Because, obviously we have to convince the people of Germany, of Italy, of France, and other European countries that they should express their view. So what would be your advice? What should be done?
It's not my advice what will be done. I'll tell you what reality is. The Russian attitude, unanimously voiced, is peace through victory. There will be no compromise. Russia will win this war. Europe, you call them the coalition, the willing to do what? They have no capabilities, none. Europe has nothing to offer. If they want a continued war, then Europe will be destroyed economically, because Europe's not going to send troops, because Europe doesn't have any troops to send. It's an empty threat. Russia doesn't view the Europeans seriously. The only power that Russia will talk to right now is the United States. That's it. Europe has taken itself off the table. Russia doesn't care about Europe. They don't consider Europe. And if Europe wants to hook and jab in Ukraine, then they'll all die. Peace through victory. This is what it's come to. There will be no stepping back. The Russian people have sacrificed too much. Their cause, in their opinion, is just. There's no room for compromise. And this is a sad thing to say when it comes to the cause of peace. 1.7 million Ukrainian soldiers have died. And before this is done, another million will die. They died at a rate of 625,000 so far this year. And if Ukraine and Europe want to continue to shove meat into the meat grinder, the Russians will kill as many Ukrainians as are put on the battlefield. Russia will not stop. Victory will be had. That's the end of it. Now, Russia's terms for conflict resolution are just. They've been consistent. Russia hasn't deviated one iota, but they will not stop short of denazification. I spent a lot of time talking about what that will look like. Demilitarization is absolute. I don't know what fantasy world Europe in. The Ukrainian army will be 50,000 strong, lightly armed with no NATO influence at all. That's the reality. There won't be any deviation from that. Russia is Russia, meaning all of the territory that is constitutionally Russia will be part of Russia. And here's a warning to the Ukrainians. If you want to continue this war, where Russian blood is spilt, will be Russia forever. So if the Ukrainians compel Russia to go into Odessa, to go further into Kharkov, to go into Sumy, they will lose these territories too. Russia's not making this a demand for peace, but Russia is saying that if you want war, then there will never again be Ukraine. And the other thing I'll leave you with is this notion of Austrian-style neutrality. The Russians are clear. When they say neutral Ukraine, they mean a Ukraine that is under the Russian umbrella. There will be no classic neutrality. They don't trust it anymore. Finland ruined it. Switzerland ruined it. Austria ruined it. To be neutral in Europe is to be pro-West, anti-Russian. End of story. The Russians know this. They see it. And Europe can't convince them otherwise. There is no credibility anywhere in Europe to sit down with the Russians. They won't listen to any European voices. They will only listen to the President of the United States, and only so long as the President of the United States appears to be serious about pursuing peace that respects Russian national security prerogatives. That's a sad conclusion, but that's the reality. And people need to accept it, because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels. Russia will never yield, ever.
I have one more question to maybe both you, Scott, and you, Ted. You read or heard that the Italians supposedly arrested one of the people who were involved in the sabotage of Nord Stream. Now, given the fact that, that is very unlikely, given the fact that the possibility to do the sabotage from a sail ship, I mean, we discussed this in the past, technically sounds very dubious. You had Seymour Hersh and others putting forward much more plausible hypothesis. The Russians are now demanding an independent investigation about the sabotage. Now, I mean, the German minister said, yeah, it was probably, one cannot exclude that there was government support from Ukraine, but we will stand without vacillation on the side of the Ukrainians. I mean, it's sometimes very difficult to not burst out in laughing, if not the reality is that the German economy is collapsing, and everything Germany has tried to build up after the Second World War is being lost right now. So it's not really a laughable situation. But can you give me your assessment? What do you think? Why are they producing this witness or this culprit at this point? I mean, how credible is the whole story, and what is your view on this?
Well, I'll go real quick because I do have to run. I need to see the evidence. I mean, before I can even make an assessment. Politically, it just seems too convenient. This is a time when Ukraine is going to run into the harsh reality that it has no friends. It never has had any friends. And now that Ukraine's become politically inconvenient to Europe and the United States, the hard truths and other lies about Ukraine are going to be told to diminish Ukraine, to make it impossible to support Ukraine. Before I condemn this man, though, he deserves due process, and the evidence must be put forward that sustains the charges. As you've indicated, there are compelling counter narratives out there. But until we get all the facts, I would treat this as a political move. And on that note, unfortunately, I do have to run. So thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Good to see you, Ted, and Dennis,
Nice to see you.
Anastasia, and everybody else. Have a good day.
Thanks, Scott. Stay safe.
May I say something about this issue?
Please go ahead, Ted.
I have Cy Hersh and I are friends for many years, and from time to time, Cy has called me up when he's writing a story to get my technical assessment. He's the journalist. He's the genius journalist, not me. But he called me up when he was writing this story. In fact, I was stunned when he told me what he was going to write about, because it was so crazy that I couldn't believe that we would do it. And let me tell you, there's no doubt at all in my mind that the United States did it and that Joe Biden ordered it. And we have these statements made by Joe Biden before the actual attack on the pipeline occurred. They were visible. And when Cy called me up, he had information about the operation from his source. And I know something about underwater acoustics. That's a big area. If you're, I was an advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations, and underwater operations are, of course, an important area. And I asked him a bunch, not one, a bunch of very specific questions about how this was implemented. And we had a go around, several go arounds, where I said, this sounds implausible, but here are questions I have for your source. And these questions would require a deep knowledge of underwater acoustics, or somebody who has access to someone who has deep knowledge of underwater acoustics. And each time I asked a set of questions, he came back with answers that indicated he was talking to an individual who had access or direct knowledge of underwater acoustics at a level that was absolutely appropriate for understanding what this operation was. And my assessment immediately after hearing that was completely changed. I was totally skeptical that the United States would do something so stupid and provocative and so damaging to our allies, because this had more of a consequence for Germany and Europe. The current situation in Germany economically is disastrous, and it can all be traced back to the loss of pipeline gas, which fueled the German economy, fueled the heavy parts of the German economy. And there's absolutely no question in my mind that his source was accurate. And when I hear about this other source, a bunch of yahoos on some kind of yacht handling multiple 100-pound munitions that would have to be placed at a very deep depth for divers on that pipeline, it just sounds totally ridiculous. And we also have additional information from other sources now, like a Norwegian who witnessed ships out in that area when he thought there was a problem. So my view is I would give zero credibility to this other source as being what caused the the source of the attack. Zero. Anyway, that's my informed guess.
What about the timing of that discovery of that new culprit?
Of the new discovery of
No, I mean, why would they find this person now taking her vacation in Rimini in terms of the political situation?
The political environment is so filled with blatant lying at this point that you can't believe anything that you hear without, thinking twice and thrice. May I make a comment about this new number for Ukrainian losses and casualties? It's kind of made me sick, to be honest with you, and I just want to share why, for your audience. If you lose 1.5 million of your young men, because there were women, of course, fighting, but most of the soldiers were men, in a society that now is not much more than 20 million or 22 or 23 million people. Ukraine used to have 40 million people when this terrible war started. But if you lose a million and a half people, you have lost 3 million people in reality, because all of these young men would have partnered with young women. So you have done extraordinary damage to the demography of Ukraine. You have essentially eliminated a full generation of people at the peak of their reproductive and economic contributing ages. You have just cut a hole in the society, and it brings me almost to tears, to be honest with you, because this was brought about by Ukrainian leadership. When I hear these numbers, when I heard these numbers, I thought about Hitler's behavior when the Russians were closing in on Berlin, and all those soldiers died, Germans and Russians, for no reason other than the fact a maniac was unwilling to acknowledge that a war was lost and just do the right thing for his own people. I'm not talking about Russians if you're Hitler, for the Germans in Germany, when in fact we know that Hitler was ordered Albert Speer to destroy most of Germany, and Speer did not actually follow the order. So this is the kind of Götterdämmerung kind of racist, malicious, monstrous leadership that was in Hitler, in the German leadership at the end of World War II, being re-expressed in the leadership of Ukraine, which is also filled with these Banderites who are basically neo-Nazi white supremacists. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just felt the need to vent on that point.
No, I think that's important to bring up because this really is a loss for Ukrainians to have been
Yes.
pressured and coerced into continuing this, knowing full well that they can't win. And it's just going to annihilate their whole population. It's been really disgusting, actually, the abuse
It
that's
is
been done.
disgusting.
Yeah. So as much as we want to denazify, we should also recognize and have empathy towards, what's happened to the innocent people of Ukraine, and my heart really does go out to them. Um, we do have Garland Nixon on, excuse me, Garland Nixon on, who's a veteran progressive radio host. Pardon me. It's really important to have you on for this dialogue, just given what you represent and your ability to actually um, talk to people of all walks of the aisle, so to speak, especially here in the U.S. So I wanted to just bring you on to see if you have any response to anything so far, or to Helga, Ted, or even Scott, what he had brought up as well.
Well, I think what they're saying is very important, and I think what I kind of focus on is making sure that the things that a Ted says, the things that the people Helga, the things that people discuss at a very high level in these kinds of meetings, gets transposed in a way and interpreted in a manner that the everyday consumer of information and knowledge can understand what's going on. I think that is critical, and I think that is the importance and strength of what we have today in an alternative media. We have a legacy media that is dying. It's certainly because it's kind of like watching the EU so-called leaders discuss Ukraine. They talk to themselves, they negotiate with themselves, and I always say, from my opinion, if the pundits were voting, Hillary Clinton would probably win every election in a landslide, but that's not the case. Things are changing, and I think that what the one of the things that's important when we have these discussions is to recognize that, and in all of our circles is to recognize that there are a lot of people out here who maybe don't have the technical knowledge, don't have the educational background to understand the intricacies, the details, and the technical issues that may be discussed in a lot of these meetings, even on a geopolitical level. And it's what I try to do. We have to break down this important information in a way that the masses, the common man and woman, can understand it. And I think that's the importance of, Garland Nixon and Judge Knapp and Sabby Sabs, just names of people out here that are doing this work on a daily basis. I think people who are on these various chats that we have, meetings that we have, I would, encourage everyone to take every opportunity you can to, when requested, to go on the various talk shows, even the small ones that seem insignificant. Some of them will grow really, really fast, and some of these things will go viral. Also, I think it's important to, and this is important too, if you see a particular alternative media podcast, YouTube show, Rumble show, whatever, and you say, that's I like that, or you see something interesting, take the time to contact these people. A lot of times you can find them on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or something like that, and just message them, because we as and this is important. The people who have YouTube shows oftentimes kind of get accustomed to having the same people over and over again. And when we get contacted by people that we don't normally have, we are excited about that, having a new person on board. So I would implore the people here to take the opportunity, if you see a YouTube show or Rumble or Rockfin or whatever, to reach out to those people and let them know what you're doing. Yeah, I'm working on this or that, or I have expertise on this and that. I'd love to come on your show sometime, because most of the time you're going to get a sure, hey, great, I'd love to have you on to talk about that. We're always researching, looking for new people. And to me, that's the important thing to recall about these kinds of what I would consider a high level meetings and critical meetings. And that is, these meetings are great. How do we get this information out in big numbers to people? Something else, a project that I've been talking about. I'm working on it more, hopefully doing some international work on it. And this is something that I would really like to see expand, and that is, as an example, for those of us who use StreamYard, if I do a show on StreamYard, StreamYard is a platform that allows me to stream on, I can do a video, and I can stream on YouTube, on Instagram, on Rumble, on all of these several, I think up to 8 or 9 platforms at the same time. But there's something else I can do that's important. Anyone else who uses StreamYard, and most of the people use it now, most of the podcasters use it, anyone else who uses StreamYard, I can send them a link, and they can run it on their YouTube show or all of the above also. And one of the things I think it's important for us to try to start working on doing is building these networks out, so that if it would be great if we get like a whole, say, an email list. So someone could say, hey, Garland, let's do a show on this or whatever, right? This is important. Say we're doing something with TED or whatever the case may be. And that we have a list of, all of the big YouTube shows, all the YouTube shows that we can think of. And when you send that to me, I send that out to all of the YouTube shows and say, hey, everybody, on Thursday at 8 p.m., we're running this show, and send it out to everybody. And 20, 30 different YouTube shows are running, let's say me or whoever has Ted Postel at the same time. When we did this thing with Ted and Scott and other people, this nuclear war, anti-nuclear war activist thing in, I think it was November. That's something that happened. We sent that link out, and I looked, and I'm like, wow, Danny Haifong has 5,000. I have 1,500. And I looked, and in a few seconds, I was able to count like 10 or 20,000 viewers right then. And then we started telling people, hey, why don't you all tweet this out? Or X, whatever it is. send the links to this to members of Congress, to everyone. So I think that one of the things that we all need to focus on is getting the things that we're doing, the meetings, the information out to the masses. How do we do that? And one of the ways that we can do that, not to sound like a broken record, is to continue to build a network. It's actually really, really easy to do. If I just had a list right now, if we had to put a list together, okay, we're doing a show on such and such, send that list out, everybody, we're doing it on this date. And if you know someone else, send it to them, send the link, and it just pops up everywhere. So I think, um, there are very, very simple ways we can do to expand our reach, to expand our message. And I think that that this whole podcast alternative media thing is really growing. We see Sergey Lavrov and people saying, well, let me bring some of these people in and so there are people in this world that have recognized the power of alternative media. The question is how we can grow that exponentially into communications to people, and that helps build movements to continue the good works that are going on here. So that's my thoughts.
I think that's a great idea. No, definitely, because we have these meetings regularly every Friday, but there's also other things that are going on. And if we had this kind of network, which we already have been building up over time, but I think walking people through the wall of fire of associating with people they may not agree with, I think that's really most of it, is where a lot of the resistance comes from. But I wanted to see, Helga, if you had a response, and I know Dennis Speed, you have a response.
Yeah, I think great what you are saying, Garland. I think that's exactly what we should be doing, not only in one country, but internationally, because, I know that, for example, in Africa, there are lots of people who have no voice, in Europe or in the United States, and they would love to be heard. That's just one example. But let me make a concrete suggestion. We have today the 22nd of August. In less than 2 weeks, on the 3rd of September, we have this meeting in Beijing, which could be potentially a breakthrough for all of humanity. Because if we could get President Trump convinced, that he said he may have trouble if he goes to Moscow, but he said he wants to go to China this year anyway. That would be a perfect opportunity, and it would send the strongest possible message. If Trump and Putin and Xi and other leaders like Lula and Modi and others would basically reiterate the promise, never again fascism, never again war, and then go to, cooperation instead of confrontation. So why don't we put our heads together to make the spreading of that message the next concrete step? That is my proposal to you, Garland.
Oh, absolutely. I'm in favor of it. I stay in contact with Dennis regularly, and I'm all for working on doing these kinds of things, working on these kind of projects and advancing them. Dennis and I have talked about this for some time, but we haven't really got a chance to act on it for a number of reasons. But I think as the fall comes in, and for those of you who don't know the alternative media, I'll say this, something to understand. It usually dies out in July and August. People are on vacation. It's nice outside. People don't watch YouTube and Rumble as much. The numbers dramatically decrease during the late summer vacation times and good weather times. However, when kids go back to school in September, the numbers go up and go through the roof. So, maybe it's a good idea. I'd be happy to work with Dennis, and we can talk with some other people and set up a particular project, set up a particular time and date that we choose. We get some really big names, some big draws, and we go ahead and do this. Reaching out. Maybe we could talk to Galloway. He may be involved. There are a lot of people. We have contacts, and we can put this thing together. And as you probably know, once, being around DC, I know, boy, everybody wants to get on a train once it leaves the station. And if you get it going and get a couple of big names and a couple people that really want to go along, and people start seeing it growing, everybody's going to want to be involved in it. So I think I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think now that September and everything's going to get going again. This is the perfect time for us to do this. And there's a lot going on, with China, with people being concerned about God only knows what could happen in Venezuela. There are a lot of things going on right now that would be attractive to people who want to come in and both have a voice and to learn and feel like they're being a part of, a movement that's growing, I'll say. And that's the important thing, I think, to maybe at some point we could get a name or whatever, but to create a movement where you bring the people in and we go from talking and discussing and sharing information to now calls for action where the people who are watching and the listeners and the viewers are now asked to act in a way that benefits us all.
Great.
Well,
Go ahead, Dennis.
no, I just wanted to respond to what Garland was saying. I think while we don't need necessarily a name, what we're talking about is a form of, I'll call it an intercontinental Congress. I'm not referring, let's call it now, that's the new name. But if you think back to the founding of the United States, what was important was that there were people who deliberated in what became the Continental Congress at that time in 1775 and then 1776. Now, given the BRICS process, given also what just happened last week with Trump and Putin, there's a need for us to use the fact of what you're talking about, this potential interface, to rapidly educate people on a lot of things they don't know. For example, the connection between the United States and Russia, specifically around the Second World War, with Franklin Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program, with Russian pilots from Soviet pilots buried in Alaska. President Putin did a flower laying ceremony at the graves of the 11 identified pilots there. The fact that the reason that there is an Alaska is because the American ambassador to Russia, Cassius Marcellus Clay, had a discussion with Tsar Alexander II, who was supporting the Union cause, where England was supporting the Confederacy at the time. And the reason that Alaska resulted was because they wanted to try to curb British maritime power in the Pacific. That's not known. These sorts of things, not just as factoids, in other words, but as actionable, because right now the vector is September 3rd. The vector is this Bering Strait possibility, the fact that China, Russia, and the United States all have a dominant and decisive role in that area of the Pacific. And since just we were told, yesterday, there's now a more open discussion about Japan perhaps going to nuclear weapons. Well, for anybody that knows the actual history of things like the massacre at Nanjing and recognizes the way that Chinese veterans of the Second World War and their families would see this whole process, it's really essential that we think about doing. Helga's proposing something very specific about the next 10 days. If we can do, as an experiment, a process that actually changes the perception worldwide, particularly in and around the peace movement, of what's possible. And I think that's what this would do. One thing I want to ask you, Garland, and I know we have many questions for Ted, some questions for Ted Posel, so we're going to move to that question and answer. But you've talked before to me about the fact that you have a greater following in Russia probably than you may have in the United States. Maybe that's the too strong way of putting it. Well, maybe why don't you just describe so people have an understanding of why a process like this has international implications? It's not just a U.S. thing or something.
Well, just what I found is, I mean, I had no idea. But because I deal with a lot of things with Russia and Ukraine, I guess that it got picked up. What happened was I found out that there was this YouTube channel called Russian Accent. I got an email a few years ago, and they sent an email and they said, "Oh, we like the stuff you're doing in Russia and Ukraine. We'd like to get it, and we'd like to, put everything in the Russian language so people could do it." And I said, "Sure, no problem." And I never thought anything of it. I went to the Russian embassy to an event, and everybody's walking over to me, and I'm like, how do all these people know who I am? I mean, I'm an American. And the bottom line is, some of them said, "Oh, well, we watch you on this YouTube channel." And I looked and I saw Garland Nixon and Ray McGovern, 2.3 million views. And I saw like million, I saw like the number of views that I could only dream of here. But the people in Russia were certainly interested. I found out that interestingly enough, some of the major channels in Russia will look at various YouTube channels, mine or maybe, Judge Nap, etc. They will look at some of the YouTube channels here, and they will pick segments out and play them and interpret them. Certain things that are made that they say, like maybe a viral statements, and they'll interpret them. And people were saying, "Oh yeah, we saw you, RAA Novostia or whoever, RAA Novostia. Yeah, they had something from your YouTube channel." And I found out that there are other countries doing this stuff. So what we find now is you've got these, Rumble or YouTube, but in numerous countries, the mainstream media outlets will look and find something that American YouTubers have said that is relevant to their particular country or their particular issues, pull that and play that to their people. And the people here, the YouTube Americans, we don't even know, or you may be on a channel, you have no clue that you're talking about India or China or whatever the case may be, and that people in India and China by the hundreds of thousands or millions are seeing that. So there is the alternative media aspect of what we're doing, but in a lot of parts of the world, that alternative media is then actually being moved to the mainstream media. And so I do know I have been contacted about the potential now for going to Russia to participate in an event with podcasters. I don't know how that's going to turn out, whether it's going to happen, but there's the potential for that to happen. So again, I get back to the importance of understanding the power of alternative media and how it's not just alternative media anymore.
Great, thank you. Well, I think what I'd like to do, because my phone's blowing up, we're getting a bunch of questions coming in, is that we can continue on to the discussion period and bring in the audience. And I'll just make the general announcement for people who are watching over Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, whatever platform you're on right now. If you'd like to be part of the discussion on this Zoom meeting, you can do that by going to the schillerinstitute.com. The registration page is right on the top. And you just click on that, you register, you'll get the Zoom link, and you can participate. You must be registered to participate. So, and with that, just let me know when we've cut the stream and we can move on to the discussion.